Hi again from the TIGOX podcast set. I'm Dawn MacGregor-Bromfield, author. Today I'm going to do something a little different again. Um, this time I've actually asked that the producer can stop me at any time and ask me any question while I am explaining this particular poem. So it's a little bit different from what I had done before. But we have to mix it up and curry it up. Keep you on your toes. So you want to come back and say, what next is she coming up with? All right. Actually, I have something in my hat that is coming up soon that I'm so excited. I can't wait. Anyway, this today, the poem is called Muted. So when you think of you're watching a TV show, you're listening to music, whatever, and you don't want to be disturbed, you press mute, right? But so I started to think about that concept of being muted. Sometimes persons are around you and they're muted. You're not hearing them. If there's sometimes children around, they could be talking, but you're not hearing them. There are older people around and you're not hearing them. They're muted. And there are some instances where you actually want to be muted. All right, so I'm thinking of muted in different angles, different ways, and I'm actually going to make reference to some of the other poems that I've written. Before I read this one, I'm not going to read them, but I'm going to make reference to them. And as to different aspects, I think I was thinking about the same muted. For example, I had one called No Off Switch. Now, No Off Switch was written just prior to the pandemic. I was going through a rough time because my father was ill and my sisters were overseas. And so, trying to keep the communication flowing with all persons who were concerned, trying to deal with all his doctor visits, going in and out of hospital, and all of this, and to also continue managing my responsibilities of my workplace. I was feeling like I couldn't breathe. And I said there was no off. It was just one thing after the other after the other. And I'm just saying that this happens to many people where sometimes they get hit with stuff. And it's like this week is one thing, next week is something else, the following week is something else. There's somebody that's come to mind that every time I speak to her, she's telling me somebody else who she just heard that is very ill, critically ill, or somebody else just went into hospital, or she herself just discovered that something else on her not working properly. And I'm saying, even for her, there's no off switch. So that is one poem. Another poem is called The Sound of Silence. So even the sound of silence, you will find that sometimes you're just in a space and you're muted and you're just listening to what is around you. And listening to what is around you, because you are muted, you're able to take in more and more what is happening around you. So that's another poem, as I said, Sound of Silence. Another poem that I want to make reference to is The Call of the Zebra. Now, I am actually, if you haven't heard any of my previous podcasts, then you may not know that I'm British born, but I grew up in Jamaica. So I was surrounded first with more fair skinned persons, and then coming to Jamaica, more dark skinned persons. So I have this kind of black white situation. And I was hit with discrimination from a young age, and this having things being black and white and being treated differently because you're one complexion over another. Yeah.
So, hello everyone, my name is Corey Hart, I'm the producer. So, you said something about being treated differently because of your skin complexion. Usually, it's persons who are of the darker skin tone would say these things. But how is it for you being of a more fair complexion, being
What is Jamaican term? High color.
eye color? How is it for you? Because it has to be a dramatic change.
Yes.
I am fair skin complexion as well. I have a fair skin complexion, so I understand in terms of being a man how that affects. certain stuff, and what different types of, special treatment that I would receive. So there's good and bad, but how is it for you?
Well, as a child, so when I was in primary school in England, I actually have a photograph of the entire school, which was of course on a wide lens, and only two of us were dark. Everybody else was white, and the other person who was dark was not Caribbean origin, was Indian, but he also felt how I felt, different to everybody else. But I used to get teased a lot, and I had a kind of a eczema where part of my flesh was a little bit whiter, and it happened on my elbows especially, and then behind my knees and places like that. And this, they used to tease me and to ask me if I'm using my skin for brown color crayon. Those kind of things used to come up. You
Yeah,
know,
a lot of
so
silly stuff,
yeah.
a whole bunch
So
of silly stuff.
that was, it was hard for me taking this teasing. I have sisters who are living overseas and they are going through what they think is norm. When I go and visit them, it's not norm to me. When I can hear when somebody is saying something different to them just because of our skin tone, and they're able to take it. I couldn't live in that. That's why I prefer living in Jamaica, where you're correct. I am actually treated differently because of my high color in Jamaica,
Yes, very
because
true.
they actually thinking, oh, she look like she owns something. It look like she knows something. Yeah. Whereas if I go in England, anytime I was when I was in school, anytime there was a fight, I used to be drawn up, even if I'm nowhere near the fight. Because they just think that I had to do something with it. I have to be the instigator in some way. And they used to draw me on to the headmaster's office.
Is this because of your? Is it because you're Jamaican, or
No,
is it because
no, because I'm really British.
okay, cool,
It's because of my skin color.
skin
So
color,
that was just the skin color. Yeah. And, and then
skin
on the
color?
yeah, and on the flip side, in Jamaica, I remember one time I was actually at a youth club service, and I was new. I was actually going around looking to see which youth club I feel comfortable with, and I was visiting. I stood up at the door, and I know I was treated differently because they were drawn, coming and, oh, have a seat, welcome, da-da-da-da. What is your name, blah blah blah, and then, all of that. And then there was another person who stood up at the door, also looking like a stranger, and she was much darker than me. And I noticed no offering of no seat, no big grand welcome. And so I actually got up and said, "Do you want a seat?" So I mean, so there was two examples of being darker or lighter. I'm going to ask you to take a little break. I'm going to just have a sip of water. So I'm going to ask you to pause a moment. All right, so I've had my sip of water and I'm fresh now. So I'm just going, maybe getting a little emotional talking about all this discrimination and all these things. But that's moving on. Another one of the poems, another angle of wanting to be muted. And the name of the poem is Going into a Nursing Home. Now, this is something that I'm getting older now, and I hope not, that I hope that doesn't happen to me, that I'll have to go into a nursing home in my future, but it's a true consideration. But what I don't like, and I saw so many times repeated in my life, is when you have the family discussing it, and the person who you're discussing is in earshot, might be in another bedroom, sometimes they're in the room, like they don't have emotions and they don't have feelings. You're not discussing it with them, you're discussing about them. And I have a problem with that because they have feelings, and it's again, they're muted. You're not listening to them, you're not bringing them into the conversation. They're on silent right now while you are discussing their future and putting them in a home. Not some homes are great, right? But I'm just saying though, sometimes we have to think, what are they thinking? How are they feeling? And then the final poem I would like to refer to, as I said, I'm not reading these poems, I'm just referring to some of the poems that I thought all kind of match this muted theme. And the last one was called Empty Eyes, which I wrote pretty recently. And Empty Eyes was written after I sat with my uncle, who was 80, and I was looking at him speaking, mumbling, um, referring to things that were not, it wasn't coming out in a logical fashion. And when I look in his eyes, I can see that he really did not know who I was, and he was suffering Alzheimer's, right? And that is a big taboo, people don't want to talk about it, but it is not easy when you see the person's slipping and they're not remembering details, not remembering years, not remembering numbers, can't add 5 plus 5. I mean, when you're actually seeing this for yourself, that deterioration, it is rough, I tell you. Because this particular uncle and myself were very close, and just to see that it reached a point where he would refer to my son as professor. And I realized that when he stopped calling him professor or not, or he's asking me questions like I'm some stranger as to who my son is, I realized the disconnect was taking place there. It was rough, I tell you. And I wrote that poem, Empty Eyes. Anyway, this poem, as I said, is called Muted. And this is from different angles. Who is speaking for these people? Who is speaking for the man who can't speak for himself? Now, that could be literal. You can have somebody who is, you have dumb and deaf and so forth, right? You who can't speak. And you could have somebody who can't articulate what they want to say. So you have when in Jamaica, when somebody is not of heavy background in education, they will sometimes say the ignorant. No, the ignorance comes out in being short-tempered, feeling paranoia, meaning they think that everybody is trying to talk over them because everybody is more intelligent than them. They're trying to make them look small and they're not able to articulate what they want to say clearly, so sometimes they mute themselves. They need somebody else to speak for them, and it's not all the time they have somebody who can speak for them. What about this woman who she feels oppressed and she has no choice in what she can do next, how she can do things? That could be financial reasons. It can be because of the place that she works. It can be because of the person that she's in a relationship with. Who speaks for her? And then there are persons who they're not strong enough. Now, I have mentioned in my last a couple of weeks ago in one of my podcasts that I had been in an abusive relationship. Now, and I said, and I'm just saying it again, not beat up and thump up. I'm speaking about different ways that you can be abused emotionally, mentally, and so forth. Now, I was weak when I was in that situation. I think of myself as a strong black woman. So this weakness that I saw when I reflected, I remember, sorry, I can't help it, but I remember one day when I was driving and I had our son, in the back seat, and I went to somebody's home for him to go and deliver a computer that he had repaired. Now, this was sun hot. It was a Saturday, sun hot. So with the AC not working, I said, can I, while you go inside to the client and you're fixing up the computer and making sure everything is okay with them, can I just go around the corner to New Kingston Shopping Center, go underground and just cool out? And the way him carry on, no, I'm not move from there, I must stay there. And I didn't move. And I'm like, when years later, I'm looking back at that story and I'm like, what the hell? I have a key in my hand. I have the car throttling. I am the driver. And I didn't move. What made me not move? Obviously, I was weak. I wasn't strong, as I feel that I am now. I feel I'm very, very strong now. And I tell others, don't have that foolishness happen to you. And foolishness happened to me because I did not move. I stayed right there, sweating, my son sweating, until him take how much hours to come back and find us right there, two of us sweating in the car that don't have the AC because he said don't move. so I'm telling you, sometimes you need somebody else to speak for you or speak with you. I was mute because I didn't tell people. I'm telling this story now, but I never spoke about it then. I worry about the old people who have no children. No, it is not that children have to be doing everything for their parents, you know. I don't say that. And I'm not one of those parents who's saying, oh, my children better look after me when I get older and, send me money to do this and that. No, I'm not saying that either. But what I'm saying is that suppose you don't have a child and you are now old and need help. Where you get this help from? It's easier to call on your child and say, can you send me help or can you buy a little medicine for me or something? But
Yeah.
what happened to all those elderly that don't have nobody?
Speaking of children,
Yeah?
I'm pretty sure that Derek is such a blessing to you
Yeah.
because he's present. He's a present son,
Yes.
and I'm sure he's willing to do a lot for you. So it really hits my heart when you said that. What about the persons who don't have children or someone just to be there and be present to help them? So I understand your concern.
And you are so right when you spoke about him being present because even if he didn't live with me, I know he'll be present because he actually reaches out. He asks me if I'm okay. And sometimes, I'm going through a day and I don't want to push it all out on him. And he just looks at me and he knows and he says, do you want a hug?
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's a son.
you are dead on. You are so dead on there. And so there's circumstances too where some persons might go down a rabbit hole. I know somebody who was a pathological liar. And why that happened? The person made one big lie, and to cover that lie, they had to do another lie, and they had to do another lie because of that lie. And they ended up lying about things that it was unnecessary to lie about. And this is the rabbit hole that they went down. There's some people that go down the rabbit hole of, oh, a little cigarette smoke here now to relax me. And a little cigarette, and you're not feeling so relaxed. Oh, let me try a little spliff. Oh, yes, spliff is good now. And then, oh, the spliff not doing it anymore. Oh, let me try a little cocaine. And then they gone down the rabbit hole
Yes.
to something else to help them feel high. And let me get this straight now, I have a lot of friends who smoke. I have a lot of friends who smoke all of those things. But I'm just saying, all things must be done within moderation. So the rabbit hole I'm speaking about is when you're out of control. When you cannot control what it is that you are consuming or doing, and you're always looking for that next high. That's what I'm referring to. So there's a lot of different ways that we want to mute. We don't want to talk. There's a lot of taboos. People have secrets holding that they don't want to share, and it is burdening them. But remember, you have counselors, you have places out there that you can reach out to and get help. There are places that are there to help, but you need to talk, you need to reach out and let people know that you need the help. So without any further ado, I'm going to read the poem now, but just remembering that mute can be all different kind of angles. Muted. What happens to the man who has no voice? What happens to the woman who has no choice? I pity those who think strong but are weak. I worry about the elderly who have no child to speak. Circumstances have led some down a rabbit hole, different paths traversing the totem pole. Those who live in dust, too frail to sweep. Those with the stories they have to keep. Who will unmute the silenced crowd? Who will choose to talk out loud? Against those who think it's okay to demand that as minor does what they command. Against those who ignore a woman's weep, lifting fists to her, cutting dignity deep. Against those who are blind in an online world that trivializes their pain in a smartphone swirl. Who has the strength? Who has the tool of penetration? Media, legacy, gossip, parties, or the next generation? Who?